Well, zooey, is this the Summer Olympics in Moscow under the Soviet Union in 1980? Because I sure do see a lot of fucking red flags! Fuck! Oh, buddy. Oh, boy. God. I'm gonna self-medicate. Oh, okay. All right.
Niner, we get a cult inbound confirmed.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a very spicy, dark, esoteric episode of Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist. And this morning, I went to a church.
Duh.
But not just any church, an illustrative church that is eye-catching, that I've wanted to visit since I was 19. So here's the deal. There's a series of churches in North Carolina, in my neck of the woods, that have very weird iconography. They have very unique buildings, very eye-catching buildings. Kind of the staple of these buildings is they always have two statues of lions with piercing eyes that just kind of grab you as you're walking by. There's one of these churches in my hometown. There's one of these churches in downtown Raleigh. There's one in Charlotte where I went to seminary. And yeah, so I had heard some weird things about these churches over the years. So I finally went to visit, see if it's as bad as people are saying. So the church in question is the United House of Prayer for All People. However, technically that is the abbreviated title. The full name is the United House of Prayer for All People of the Church on the Rock of the Apostolic Faith.
That's long enough.
And I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but this was a black church, and you guys are absolutely living up to the stereotype that black churches have obscenely long names for no apparent reason.
We're going to the AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Viacom, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's Auditorium.
Even though this is called the House of Prayer for All People, I was the only person there of Caucasian persuasion.
He's white.
Which is fine. I love going to black churches. This was definitely one, though, that was, you know, different. So I pull up to the parking lot, and I walk up to the front door. I pass the two statues of the big ferocious lions, and I go and jimmy the front door. And the front door is locked. And beyond that, it's obscured. Like, you can't see inside, which was weird. So I'm starting to wonder if, like, the, you know, online worship service times were wrong. But then, just out of curiosity, I go downstairs and find another unlocked door and go through that one. And then there's like a separate sanctuary on the first floor that's considerably smaller than you would expect for a church that size. It was very weird. So I walk in, and it's a very small black church. There's probably 20 pews, 10 on each side, and then there's a pastor, a couple of praying ladies, and then some people kind of trickling in. Yeah, so service started at 11. I was one of the first people in the room. So I'm one of like 5 people in the sanctuary, and the pastor's, you know, kind of getting his groove on, starting to pray and doing his thing. And then over the course of the next hour, there's probably, I don't know, 50 to 100 people packed into this oddly small second sanctuary. And then when it was packed, it was bumping. It was really bumping. So worship lasted for well over an hour. And it was kind of cool to see it, you know, morph and evolve from it being, you know, a cappella and a whole bunch of people with tambourines to then, before I knew it, there was an entire brass section. It was literally just percussion and brass, and they killed it. I swear, they had six trombone players who were just blaring that thing. And it's not that they had like a particularly good sound system. There was no sound system. I think the pastor had a mic, but that was it. It was all just this wall of sound from this insane brass section. My ears are still ringing. Now, the worship was my first tip-off to the fact that things here were not like a normal church. Now, on the surface, it felt like your average passionate, compelling black church. Really intense music, you know, people hollering and shouting, people speaking in tongues. So a lot of the worship songs sounded very similar to songs that you would hear in your average black church. But if you listen really carefully, there were some questionable lyrics in there. So they would sing things like, "We got grace, grace, we got grace, grace, we got faith, faith, we got faith, faith, we got daddy, daddy, we got daddy.
What?
Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, Jared, no, this is just the modern hip new thing that, you know, Christians are doing, where they call God Daddy. Nope, they're not talking about God. They're talking about a dude. They're talking about a guy.
This great man of God. Any believers in this man of God? And I want you to repeat after me like you believe that He is the man of God. Say, precious Daddy Cunningham. Oh, precious Daddy Cunningham. We want to welcome you.
So my first tip off to this was on their doctrines page, the Our Belief section on their website. If you scroll down to the very bottom of their creed, it's got a whole bunch of verbiage about we believe in Jesus Christ, his begotten Son, crucified, Holy Ghost, blah, blah, blah. And then it says at the very bottom, we believe in one leader as the ruler of the kingdom of God. They're talking about their bishop. They're talking about a dude, and they call that dude Daddy. It wasn't just one song. It wasn't just one hymn that brought this up. There were several times where a woman in the church wanted to stand up and testify, and so she would, get up and she would say, I want to thank God for being good to me. I want to thank him for blessing my life, and I want to thank him that he gave me a sweet, sweet, sweet daddy.
He is the leader of this great and holy organization. He is the bishop of the United House of Prayer for all people. He is daddy to the children of the House of Prayer. I speak of none other than our very own precious, sweet, 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 sweet Daddy Madison.
Okay, so here's the thing. Pope, for example, it's a bastardization of the word papa. Fun fact, but you didn't know that. So to be fair, there always is this kind of spiritual concept of motherhood and fatherhood, he was like a spiritual father to me. That's fair, that's valid. But daddy hits different. Like daddy is bedroom talk. Let's be real. So this is surprisingly a really old denomination. I want to say that it was started in 1912, 1919, somewhere around there. So the gist of it is that this preacher comes from Portugal and starts a church here in America. And whoop-de-dee, wouldn't you know, it's the only true church. And there's not a ton of information about this guy online. From what I heard in the service though, apparently he was a miracle worker, so he's got that going for him. And he seems to have prioritized community development. And this church has been known to do a lot of community development. We'll get there. So this bishop, I think his name was C. Grace Daddy, something like that. He comes to America, starts a church. He is referred to as Sweet Daddy. Now, he has his own apostolic succession. He had a bishop who he appointed for when he died.
Can you feel God moving, talking to you?
And then that bishop had another bishop after him, and now we are on our 5th bishop in 100 years. Cool. Current bishop's name is Cunningham, and Cunningham is referred to as Sweet Daddy. Now, Sweet Daddy is not here at this church. There are over 100 of these congregations that all report to Sweet Daddy. Now, this current bishop has been in place for less than a year, and there's fewer than 100,000 members of this denomination. So it's not like he's the Pope, it's not like he's that far removed. Because, the bishop will come to this church eventually, give it enough years and, he will put this church in his roster of churches that he comes and visits. So they've got a succession of 5 bishops that they've had in the past 100 years, and murals of each of those 5 bishops was behind the pulpit. So just to be clear, there's no painting of Jesus anywhere. He's mentioned a lot in the service, but there's no painting of Jesus in the sanctuary. There was a painting of Jesus in the soup kitchen. We'll get there. But there were only murals of the 5 bishops, the true leaders of the true church. That they were really highly esteemed there, really highly regarded. So the Bishop Cunningham, he is not currently present at this church. He's not present at most of them. However, there is a dedicated seat for this bishop. Behind the pulpit, there's this big purple throne with a big plastic tarp over it. And what I could gather from the service was that this holy place, this little throne, this is the holy mountain of God where only the bishop is allowed to sit. It's a holy place. Don't go near it. Even if the bishop only comes once every 5 years, that throne is reserved for the bishop. Weird. So, cool. So the worship is dying down, and the pastor starts preaching. And the pastor, he was a good orator. He was very passionate, he was very articulate, and he had, you know, kind of the quintessential black preacher vibe, you know, the raspy voice and, you know, the big gestures. And I love stuff like that. I'm all about it. So he takes the mic and first thing he does is he welcomes me as a visitor. Maybe like 20 minutes before, there was a woman in the congregation who ran up to me and asked me to write my name on a piece of paper so that the pastor could welcome me by name. I also wonder if they were like Googling my name, you know?
Are you a terrorist?
So the pastor takes the mic and he says, "First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome our guest, Jared Smith." And then he started preaching. And I don't really remember what the sermon was about. I think it was him kind of patting the congregants on the head for how proud they had been making the bishop.
This great man of God. Any believers in this man of God?
It was a little weird. It was a little uncomfortable. I'm gonna cut to the point. It sounded like the entire thing was like just everyone clamoring for the attention of the bishop. Like, oh, the bishop said he might come for the convocation and we're gonna show him how passionate we are. Oh, and the worship team. You wanna know what their name was? The Cunningham Sons of Joy. Ugh, ick, ugh. Just imagine like if the National Guard band all of a sudden was called the Trumpers Trumpeteers. Doesn't that just feel like a little icky? So after the pastor's sermon, after he did some solid hooting and hollering, then it was time for the offering.
So give me your money and all of it and don't fuck with me!
Now, money had been discussed several times up to this point in the service. Somebody who was like opening with a prayer started the service off by quoting the verse that says, you know, "You've stolen God through your tithes and offerings by not paying them." That was at the beginning of the service. Throughout the service, there was also some mentions of money. And then there was time for tithes and offering. Now, I get it. Sometimes a church is tight on coin and, you know, they have to do the uncomfortable sermon where they say, "Hey, y'all, we really need to pitch in as a church family and we really need to come together so that we can pay for the new roof." Valid and fair. This wasn't that. This was wild. The offerings took 30 minutes at least. And it wasn't like a quiet, contemplative, you know, strum a few chords on the guitar and go up and put your envelope in there. Oh no, it was a game. So you would hold up $20 bills and a person would come and grab it and then they would go up to the mic and say, "We want to thank Sister Sheila for a donation of $40 and put it on the table. And then, you know, somebody else would congregate and grab 3, you know, bills from different people and say, "All right, and from row 4, we've got $72 and put it on the table. And it was all public knowledge and it was very uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable. Why? Why would you single people out like that and make them feel like shit for not being able to give more money to your church? What the fuck? So they keep giving and giving, and then there's more and more updates, and like, all right, we're up to $512. Let's give Lord a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Then the offering just kept getting weirder. It wasn't just that they were publicly announcing how much each person was giving or how much each like little group was giving. I kid you not, they then had the audacity. Somebody from the leadership team gets up there and is like, "All right, ladies and gentlemen, can we just get $115 more before the praise team comes up? Just $115 more. All right, just $75 more. All right, can we get $55 more? So it started at like $115 that they wanted. And then 20 minutes later, it was like, all right, and if we can just get $35 more, we can move on with the service. It was like a pay-to-play kind of deal. What the fuck? It was like this church was made by EA Sports. Like you walk into church and it's got microtransactions. Oh God. And now that I'm thinking about it, there were people on the wall who were like honored. Like they had like a big like sign that said like, "And we want to commemorate, you know, Shirley Temple for her something, you know, elderly saint extraordinaire, #1 in the church." And I'm pretty sure that those were just like the top donors of the month. Oh God. Okay, cool. So we're on with some pay to play shit. So then in the middle of, you know, all these people in the congregation just casually pulling out, you know, another $5 bill, another $10 bill, another $20 bill. I wish I were making this up. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what I saw. They started selling raffle tickets for the tithe money? This is absurd. This is so fucking absurd. They were passing out tickets. No, they were selling tickets. 1 for $1, 7 for $5, and you grab tickets and then you get a little share. You get a tiny little sliver of the tithe money. So, you know, after they're done pimping you out of exorbitant amounts of money, they say, all right, and if your ticket ends in numbers 807, congratulations, you just won $25.
What the fuck?
And the whole thing was, I'm really struggling here, man. I'm really hoping that I like misunderstood, like, oh no, this is a different pot that they're taken from, and that they're shelling out, and that they're selling tithe money, like hey, you want to give to the church? You got a gambling addiction? Well, sweet. Yeah, have you ever tried tithing? It's the same thing now. It was so bonkers. It was so fucking bonkers. So they gave away 2, $25 cash prizes, and literally it's like the red carnival tickets. Like they went through the whole song and dance of like shuffling around a jar full of tickets, and all right, and 7602. Oh, Miss Shelley. All right, congratulations. All right, can we just get $35 more in today's tithe money? Okay, cool. So that happened. That was a thing. So in the middle of all of that, not surprising, there was a casual remark about how, you get accursed if you aren't tithing. Let's talk about some of the redeeming factors of the church, if any. The people were nice. They weren't nearly as nice as the people at Abba Worship Center.
Abba, we want to welcome Jared Smith, who has joined us here this morning. God bless you.
That was a black church that I went to a couple months ago, and that was just a wonderful experience. So incredible. This was, it wasn't, the people weren't mean, they weren't standoffish. I definitely got some like very uncomfortable looks being the only white person there, and fair enough, that's totally understandable. I think towards the end, like the pastor, I kind of won his approval over just by like smiling and nodding throughout the service. And so, he kind of let the congregation know, hey, go welcome him. And so, I got some handshakes, I got a hug from somebody. So that was fair enough. A couple of the women that I talked to, I asked them like, yeah, so how long have you been here? And 2 of them said, well, I've been here all my life. And I can't imagine that. It's really frightening. So the pastor walks over, shakes my hand, and leads me to the foyer. And he was very nice. He was very accommodating. Shook my hand. Let me ask some questions. Like, okay, so let me ask you about the bishop, man. So I understand that he's the successor of Daddy Seagrace, and he restored the gospel to its full essence. And he's like, yes, sir, that's right. And we believe, that God always has a man who is leading his church. And so we had a nice little conversation. He was maybe a little nervous. And I think that was one of the things that I picked up on throughout the whole service, was it felt like they were a little embarrassed about it. Kind of case in point, like there wasn't a sign outside that said like, all visitors welcome, like come and worship with us 11 a.m. It felt a little bit more cloistered, almost like they wanted to kind of pick and choose who's coming into the service. It's spread by word of mouth, not by advertising. And so after we talked for a little bit, he was like, well, have you eaten anything? Here, let me go buy you a meal. And I was like, oh shoot, man's taking me out to Red Lobster, let's go. But then he takes me through the back door, and I had noticed that there was a back door next to this smaller sanctuary in the basement. And he takes me back there, and it's a soup kitchen. And this was something that I had heard about this church, was that they do a lot of community-oriented outreach. So every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they have a kitchen open with presumably subsidized food, and they're feeding people at a really affordable rate for people who can't otherwise, get decent food. So I go through the line, and I get some turkey wings and some broccoli casserole.
Turn this into a mukbang channel.
And the pastor paid for it, which was really cool of him. When I told him that I was living in Raleigh, he said, cool, let me get your name and number. I'm gonna pass your information along to one of the pastors there, and I'll see if he can reach out to you and he can coordinate something. So straight up, as I was talking to the pastor, I told him like, hey man, I'm sorry if I was a distraction during the service. And to his credit, he said, hey, listen man, that sign out there says that we are a United House of Prayer for all people. And we mean that, all people. And to be fair to this congregation, it is a black church and probably a black cult, if I'm allowed to use the C word, but they're not a black supremacist cult like the black Hebrew Israelites would be. Yeah, let's talk about this for a sec. Is this a cult? My answer is yes. And for people who don't spend a whole lot of time studying religion, or maybe, they only study like true crime, I think they have a very warped perception of what a cult is. Cults are primarily about control, and it's primarily about censoring information to the adherents of the faith. Like, you don't have to be deep in the woods with a white hood on, sacrificing rabbits to Satan to be a cult. It's kind of a question of how deep are the clutches of this organization in the spines of people who are walking in this faith. And I think that in this place, it's pretty bad.
I went to church every Mondays for band practice or choir rehearsals. Monday, Tuesday nights, pastor nights. Wednesdays was band practice. Thursdays was youth night. Fridays was some kind of program. Saturday was another program.
A dirty man can't wash you clean. It takes a clean hand man. I am that man.
And when Sweet Daddy would come into town with his long Cadillac, long nails, and long perm, he would sit on a throne at the front of the church. And these young girls, they would call the McCullough maids, would stand up there with these big fans and literally fan him.
I wish that I could talk to some of the people who have been excommunicated from this congregation. I wish I could talk to some of the people who have been burned from this congregation, because I know that there have been a lot of them. But on the flip side, I think I want to use this as an opportunity to kind of commend evangelicals. Y'all don't realize how good you have it that you're just able to walk away from your religion. There's a lot of religions out there, there's a lot of cults out there where you can't leave safely. You can't disclose, hey, I'm not a Christian anymore, or I'm not a believer in this faith anymore. That's dangerous. So the fact that evangelical culture is going through a crisis because there's a huge moving away from the faith and deconstructing and deconverting, in some sense, that's a good thing. Like, it's not objectively good for y'all, but the fact that people can do that freely and safely, that's a good sign. Nobody's getting burned at the stake. Nobody's getting shot. Nobody's getting disfellowshipped. Very few people in the evangelical world are saying, hey, don't talk to somebody if they've left the faith. That's not a normal thing that you hear from the pulpit. With congregations like this, though, I'm not so sure. Now, people don't think about this a lot, but one of the biggest tactics that cults have at their disposal is kind of like the sunk cost fallacy. If you start to feel like you've invested your entire life into this ministry or into this church, then it's a lot harder to come to grips and say, yeah, maybe the bishop wasn't a man of God. It's really hard to come to terms with something like that. And so if you've spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours giving to community service for this place, that in itself can be a means to keep you in. And I'm really struggling with the idea of some of these people just absolutely pestered and heckled and nickeled and dimed until they don't have anything left and just waving the approval of the bishop over their heads. Like, it's scary. Nowhere in this service was a message about being a good person. Nowhere in this service was there a message about being loving to the outsider or your neighbor or your friend. It was, how much can you give to the church? How much praise can you heap onto the bishop? And I'm sitting here thinking about some of these sweet old black ladies in the church who were just, sifting through their purses looking for another $5 bill that they can shove into the offering plate so that they can feel like they've won the approval of the bishop that they might never see again. And there have been some gross allegations of this church, and I really didn't want to believe them.
Our hidden cameras documented that when Bishop Bailey enters a church, members crowd the aisles to press cash money into his hands. He reaches out to pick the green bills.
And I thought, no, there's no way that actually happens. And being at this congregation this morning, sitting through this service, I would 1,000% believe that. And this church was in the hood. It was behind a fucking Walmart. And nobody is surprised by this, but Sweet Daddy is often accused of living in inordinate luxury.
You can see some of the church's wealth in real estate. Sweet Daddy Bailey stays in this 16,000 square foot mansion,
while his congregants are just, they're on the outskirts, just suffering. And now attendants of this church would be quick to point out, well, yeah, we give a lot to the church, but the church gives so much back to us. They have music programs, they have youth programs, they have food programs, they're housing the elderly. And to their credit, they are doing all of those things. But it's often at the expense of these people's livelihoods and the insane disproportion between how Sweet Daddy is living and how these people are living is really, really sickening. I mean, straight up, this entire church just felt like a pyramid scheme trying to climb the ranks just to be able to touch Sweet Daddy. And you had to pay a lot of money to get there. I hope to go back to this church. I hope to visit other congregations like this. I feel like I need to know more. I want to understand better where these people are coming from. I want to hear their stories. Shit, if Sweet Daddy came to me and wanted an interview, I would sit down with him in a heartbeat. But until then, this is the most culty cult I've been to in a hot minute. This is a 1 out of 5. Even though there were a lot of people who were hooting and hollering and excited and kind and, saying the praises of the church, I think that they were misled. So yeah, I wish I had like a positive spin to put on all of this, but no, this was just sad and eye-opening that there are people who are still living like this. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist, go to church, and to the leaders of the United House of Prayer for All People, repent.